Appalachian folk magic is deeply layered blend of old world superstition, practical survival, Christian mysticism, herbal knowledge, and oral tradition that develops throughout the Appalachian Mountains of the eastern United States. It's less about ceremonial robes and spellbooks and more about handed down wisdom whispered on porches and kitchens, around campfires and deep in hollers of places like western North Carolina, eastern Tennessee, Kentucky, Virginia, and West Virginia. Basically, the Appalachian Mountains of the South. This is the Hauntological Society.
1, 2, 3, 4.
What is up? I'm Eric. I'm your ghost host. If you haven't already guessed, today we are talking about witches from Appalachia. It's Southern folk magic, or granny magic, as some people call it, but it has some origins that comes from European and other traditions. At its core, Appalachian magic grew from the mixture of traditions brought by settlers from Scotland, Ireland, England, and Germany, which later blended with indigenous knowledge and African folk practices. Over generations, those beliefs transformed into something uniquely Appalachian, practical, mysterious, and heavily tied to the land itself. A lot of practices centered around protection, healing, luck, weather, warding off evil. In isolated mountain communities where doctors were scarce and life was difficult, people relied on granny women, water witches, healers, powwow practitioners, and folk remedies that existed somewhere between medicine, prayer, and magic. Many of those people would never have called themselves witches. In fact, most of them were deeply Christian. One of the most fascinating things about Appalachian folk magic is how intertwined it became with Christianity. Bible verses were often treated like charms or incantations, psalms especially believed to carry power. Someone might recite specific scripture to stop bleeding, heal burns, remove curses, or protect a home. To outsiders, it looked like a religion. To the people practicing, it was a religion, but with an understanding that the words carried spiritual force. There are countless examples of old mountain beliefs: hanging a broom over a doorway to keep unwanted spirits out, turning pockets inside out to break bad luck, covering mirrors after a death so spirits wouldn't become trapped, planting by the signs of the moon, using iron nails and railroad spikes as protective talismans, carrying graveyard dirt for curses or protection depending on the intent. Even seemingly ordinary things like never whistling at night carry supernatural warnings. In many mountain traditions, whistling after dark was said to attract spirits, haints, or something wandering in the woods that you didn't want to notice you. The mountains themselves played a huge role in the folklore. Appalachia has long been viewed as a liminal space, ancient, isolated, and spiritually thin. The Cherokee and other indigenous people already considered parts of the mountains sacred, long before European settlers arrived. But over time, stories emerged of haints, witches, shapeshifters, phantom lights, hidden people, and things heard screaming deep in the forest. Many families developed their own rules about what you should never do in the woods after dark. Now, one thing that separates Appalachian folk magic from modern internet witchcraft aesthetics is that traditionally, it was incredibly practical. It wasn't usually about dramatic rituals. It was about survival, healing livestock, protecting children, finding water, breaking fevers, keeping something evil from crossing the threshold of your home. It was woven into everyday life. There's also overlap with traditions like Pennsylvania Dutch, powwow, or braucherei, especially in Appalachian regions settled by German immigrants. Despite the name, powwow in this context isn't a Native American ceremony. It's a Christian folk healing tradition involving charms, spoken prayers, symbols, and healing rituals. Books like The Long Lost Friend by John George Homan became legendary in mountain communities and were often treated like magical grimoires. Modern interest in Appalachian folk magic has exploded online, but longtime practitioners sometimes warn that the real tradition is often romanticized or misunderstood. Historically, much of it was secretive. Knowledge was passed quietly through families, often only to certain people, and many believed openly talking about certain practices weakened their power. The Appalachian folk magic is steeped deep in beliefs, mixed cultures that inhabit the mountains, from Georgia to Maine, though it seems most of the supernatural beliefs mostly reside in the South. Not only did the immigrants and natives that settled this land create rituals and beliefs, but also tales of cryptids and creatures that go bump in the night. And just like the way folk magic has been passed from generation to generation, these too have become an oral tradition that is passed on, keeping the beliefs of these creatures and entities alive. When you walk through the woods of Appalachia, you can feel its power. It's ancient and alive, and the mountains breathe and give life to whatever is lurking beyond the trees. Now, the Appalachian Mountains are a place where Earth breathes differently. Their ridges roll endlessly, shrouded in green summer, aflame in autumn, and still skeletal and watchful in winter. Mornings bring a fog so thick it moves like a living thing, curling through the hollers and across the ridgelines. At night, the darkness is so complete that the stars seem brighter, closer. Yet the shadows between the trees feel deeper and older, as though they remember more than they should. These mountains are old, ancient in fact, and in their age they have gathered stories. Here, legend is not something you read about. It is something that lives in the soil, in the wind, and in the whispers that pass between neighbors. And in those whispers, there's always talk of witches. Long before the first settlers made their way into the highlands, the Cherokee spoke of a figure they feared above all others. A witch whose skin was made of stone and whose hunger could never be satisfied, and they called her Spearfinger. Her body was hard as granite, pervious to arrows and blades, and her right hand ended in a single obsidian-like finger sharp enough to pierce bone. Now, if you don't know, obsidian is volcanic rock. It's that black, shiny stone. She walked the ridges in the guise of a kind grandmother, her voice gentle, her manner patient, calling to children to come near. But if they did, she would strike swiftly, sliding her stone finger between their ribs to take their liver, which she devoured to keep herself alive. The Cherokee says she could take the form of a loved one, a parent, or a friend, making her nearly impossible to recognize until it was too late. And when her killings grew too bold, the people gathered to hunt her. They trapped her in a narrow gorge, firing arrow after arrow, but each one glanced off her stony hide. Then a chickadee, known as the Truth Teller, gave them her secret, the one spot of flesh under her right arm. They aimed there, and Spearfinger fell, her body hitting the ground like a landslide. Yet even now, some say she still wanders, a shadow among the ridges, waiting for the day someone lets her close again. If Spearfinger was feared in daylight, the Raven Mocker belonged wholly to the night. The Cherokee spoke of this witch spirit in hushed tones, for even saying its name brought its attention. The Raven Mocker came to the sick and dying, often unseen, its presence marked only by the sound of a raven's cry, carried on the wind. Once it entered a home, no prayer, no healer, no charm could save the one it sought. The Raven Mocker would steal the heart from the living, consuming it to take the person's remaining years for itself. It would then live those years as though they were its own. Only powerful witches or medicine people could see if it was what it was, a twisted, spectral figure, half human, half bird, with eyes burning cold and cruel. When it left, there was no trace of its presence save for the sound of wings fading into the dark and the knowledge that someone's time on Earth had just been stolen. Now, a little side note. I was up in Gatlinburg one time with Wendy, and we had took a ghost tour, and we were walking through, and they were taking us to different locations. And there was a cemetery that I have photos of that I will post online. And one of the stories they told about was the Raven Mocker staying near the cemetery or in the cemetery. And so I took out a spirit box and was listening and trying to get. There was a story of a Civil War soldier that was buried there, and somebody else, I can't remember. Oh, there was a kid that had fallen from the needle, and his grave was like eerily like pointed towards the needle where he fell, so he was like overlooking the place of his death. But the Ravenmocker was one of the people that was mentioned, and so I had the spirit box out, and we were listening for voices. And I was trying to get the Civil War soldier to talk because it said that he knelt in the middle of the cemetery, or they see him sitting there. And at one point, though, we heard what sounded like birds like flapping their wings, but not just like a couple, like hundreds of birds, they were filling the sky. And it lasted for about 30 seconds, and it just vanished. And I was like, "Wendy, did you hear that?" And she said, "Yeah." And it was very eerie to think about the Ravenmocker and think that my machine picked up that sound. Anyway, not all Appalachian witches were so monstrous, though. Some were healers, protectors, and guardians of their communities. These were the granny women. To outsiders, they seemed like ordinary midwives or herbalists. But in the mountains, they were keepers of an older knowledge, passed down through generations. They knew the medicinal power of plants, how to make willow bark tea for pain, yarrow poultices for wounds, sassafras for the blood, and horehound for coughs. They knew the power of the moon, and would plant crops or gather herb according to its phases. They whispered over their remedies, sometimes quoting scripture, sometimes muttering old charms that had no place in church, but every place in a home. A granny woman could witch a wart away by rubbing it with a piece of raw potato and then burying it under the new moon so the rot would carry the infection off. She could stop bleeding by reciting a verse of Ezekiel, or break a fever by passing a child 3 times under a peach tree at sunrise. There were midwives tending to births in lonely cabins during winter storms, and death wives guiding the dying with prayer and comfort. To have a granny woman's blessing was to have protection. But to cross her, to cheat her, was to risk misfortune that might follow you for years. Other witches in the mountains were less benevolent. Some practiced harmful conjure, laying tricks at doorsteps to sour a rival's health or fortune. They buried bottles filled with hair, nails, and pins to bind a person's luck. They were said to ride their victims in the night, pressing down on their chest until they woke, gasping for air. Tales spread of women who could steal milk from cows by sending their spirits in the form of snakes, and of men cursed so that the hunts always failed, their bullets veering wide, no matter how true their aim. Some curses could be broken, but only with a skill. A mirror turned to reflect the harm, an old shoe nailed above the door, or a wax figure boiled in lye water until the witch who cast the spell felt the pain herself. Now, a very peculiar cryptic is said to wander the woods. The Wampus Cat was said to have once been a young woman who spied on sacred Cherokee ceremony, a rite not meant for her eyes. But as punishment, she was transformed into a creature half woman, half mountain lion, and cursed to wander the hills forever. Her eyes would burn green in the night, and her scream could freeze the blood of anyone who heard it. Some said she hunted only the guilty. Others claimed she was simply vengeful, lashing out at any who crossed her path. There were those who swore they had seen her shadow move just beyond the tree line, keeping pace with them, though they walked alone. And farther south and east, a different terror slipped through to the mountains from the coast, the Boo Hag. Born of Gula Geechee lore, the Boo Hag was a skinless witch who wore the flesh of others like clothing. But by night, she left her stolen skin behind and slid into the homes of sleeping victims, perching on their chests to ride them, stealing their breath until they woke and exhausted. If you slept with a fan blowing on you, or left a broom by the door, the Boo Hag could be delayed, distracted by counting every straw or strand of bristle before she could reach you. But even if she rode you too many times, she might decide to steal your skin entirely, wearing it as her own until it wore thin and she sought another. These stories of the spearfinger, the raven mocker, the granny women, the conjure workers, the wampus cat, and the boo hag weave together into a single truth about the mountains. Here, the line between natural and supernatural is thin. See, the people of Appalachians understand that power comes in many forms. A healing hand, in a whispered curse, in the flicker of green eyes from the shadows, or in the sound of wings in the night, perhaps at a cemetery. And so the stories endure, because the land remembers, and it remembers the footsteps of witches and healers, the cries of the hunted, prayers spoken in secret, and on certain nights with the fog curling low and the moon hanging thin, you might feel memory pressing close, and you might hear your name spoken in a voice you don't recognize, not from any living mouth, but from the echo of those who walked here before you, those who knew the old ways. And in that moment, you will understand that the people of the mountains have always known that these hills are alive. As I close tonight's journey to the strange world of the Appalachian folk magic, I'd like to leave you with something a little older than ghost stories. Older than modern horror, something passed down through the mountain whispers. This is a story that I heard as a child, one that was my favorite. And when we would go to Cherokee, there would always be storytellers, and this story would always come up. And I'm sure every one of you are familiar with the story Jack and the Beanstalk. Well, here in the Appalachian Mountains, we have these things called Jack Tales. And Jack is a central figure, and he's always getting into some sort of menace or trouble. He's not necessarily a menace, but he's like always, what we say, getting into something. Like, you know, in the Beanstalk story, he climbs the vine, goes to the giant's lair, steals the goose that lays the golden egg, and so forth. And so he's always getting into some sort of trouble. This story is no different. But I thought it'd be fun to share this story because when I'm talking about Appalachian tales and lores and stories of this area, this is the one that I always think of. It's one of my favorites, and I hope you'll enjoy it too. Deep in the hills of Appalachia, tales were told not just to entertain but to warn. The mountains were beloved and believed to hold memory. Every hollow, creek bed, and dark stretch of forest carries stones of things unseen. Spirits, haints, witches, and charms that blur the lines between prayer and power. One such tale comes from the old Jack Tales tradition. Stories carried through the mountains by generations of Scotch-Irish sailors, shaped by the isolation and mystery of Appalachian life. This story is called Sop Doll Sop. Now, whether this was meant as a warning, piece of folklore, or something folks truly feared around the firelight, well, I'll leave that up to you. So, dim the lantern now, listen close to the wind and in the trees, and remember, some things in the mountains were never meant to be disturbed. It happened once that Jack was down on his luck, and so he decided to go out looking for work. No, Jack didn't like to work much. He figured it was better than starving. So he put his beat-up old hat on and set off down the road, and he came to an old mill. The miller was standing outside, and Jack asked him if he had any work to give him. "Well, yes, I do," said the miller. "I need someone to tend the mill and grind the corn. Work for me, and I'll pay you fair and give you board and let you sleep in the mill. But there's something I should tell you. There's a haunting going on in that mill, and nobody who's worked for me has lived past the first night they stayed there." Jack took a look at the mill. It was a fine big stone building with plenty of glass windows. Looked cozy and dry, like a good place to set up home for some time. "I reckon I could handle any haunts," said Jack. "I don't get scared much. There ain't no haunts that's worse than being dead hungry out of a job." So the miller gave Jack the keys to the mill, and let him get started. And pretty soon after that, an old man with a long beard carrying a big bag of corn over his shoulder walked up the road. "Hello, Jack," said the old man. "Hello there," said Jack. "I don't believe I've ever seen you before." "No," said the old man, "I'm a stranger." "Then how does it happen that you know my name?" asked Jack. "I knowed you time I saw you," said the old man. "I was wondering if you could grind this corn for me." And so Jack took the corn into the mill and ground it real fine for the old man. And the old man took his bag of meal and said to Jack, "You've been so kind and helpful, Jack. I want to give you this present. Take this here knife made out of silver. It's real sharp, cut real fine." So the man set off back down the road. Jack busied himself tidying up the mill and making it a home. And as the evening drew on, the miller came to the door with a hunk of meat and a big piece of pone for Jack's supper. "I reckon any man deserves a fine last meal," the miller said, and set off back to his house. Jack built himself a fire and cooked the meat into a nice stew, and set in to settle down for the night. As Jack sat there eating his stew, he saw something out of the corner of his eye. A big black cat walked into the room. Jack didn't pay it no mind, but then another cat came in, and then another. Soon there were 12 big black cats, each one bigger than the last, sitting around the room and staring at Jack. Jack was a little nervous about this, but he figured there was nothing to fear from a bunch of cats. Then the biggest, blackest cat of all walked right up to Jack. It looked up and down at Jack, and then spoke to him. "Sop, dog, sop," said the cat. It stuck its right paw in Jack's stew to sop up the juices and start licking the tasty meat right off its paw. Now Jack was a little surprised at this, but he looked right back at that and said, "You do that again and I'll cut that dog right off." And the cat didn't seem to care much. It looked up and down all over Jack, cast its bright green eyes right into that bowl. "Sop, dog, sop," said the cat, stuck its paw right in the bowl again. So Jack whipped out the silver knife that the old man had given him and cut the dog right off. When he did this, the cat let out a yowl, and all of the cats started yowling, and they ran right into the night. Jack went to pick up the cat's paw lying on the ground, but when he did, he was surprised to see that it wasn't a cat's paw lying there, but a woman's hand with a wedding ring on one finger. So Jack wrapped it up in cloth and set it aside to show the miller in the morning. When the morning came, the miller came right in without knocking, figuring he'd find nothing but another funeral he'd have to pay for. But there was Jack, stretched out before the fire, still snoring away. Now the miller woke Jack up. Jack told him what happened and showed him the hand. "I know that hand," said the miller, "and I sure know that ring. You come on up to the house with me, and we'll get all this sorted." So Jack and the miller walked into the house, where the miller led right to his wife, who was still lying in bed with the covers pulled up to her chin. "I don't feel so good," said the wife. "I ain't getting up today." "You show me your hand," said the miller. The wife stuck her right hand out from under the covers. "It's your left hand I want to see," said the miller. But the wife said she wouldn't show him her left. So he pulled off the covers where her left hand should have been. There was nothing but a bloody stump. Now the miller knew that his wife was a witch. He knew that she was the one who had killed all the men he had hired to work for him. And just then 11 other women rushed into the room. And they were the rest of the witches who knew, like witches do, that their secret was out. So Jack and the miller rushed out of the house and barred the door, set the house on fire, and pretty soon that house and all those witches burned up, crackle pop. "It's a lucky thing you had that silver knife," said the miller. "You can't hurt a witch with a knife unless it's silver. I had guessed that wife of mine had mixed up with a passel of witches, and now there's no more of that." And so Jack stayed with the miller some time, but he paid Jack well, and the miller got himself another prettier wife who wasn't a witch. Jack made a good living for a time until he reckoned he had done enough milling, and set off again to find something else to do. But if you go onto that hill today and listen closely to the wind, you can just hear, just barely beyond the trees, blowing through the leaves ever so quietly. But you have to listen really hard. You kind of crane your neck and turn your head. When the wind blows just right, you'll hear it. Sop, do, sop. And that's one of my favorite Appalachian tales. And when I would hear it, there would be this, like I said, this great storyteller, and she just had this way of telling the story. It was emotional and it was scary, and she knew what she was doing when she told that story. It was one of the greatest things I've ever heard in my life. I love to hear a nice story like that. And it was some of my early, ghost stories that I ever listened to. With that being said, I really hope you guys enjoyed the episode today. Final thought on the episode is I think it's interesting that when you look at the traditions, certain things pop up to my head. I don't know if they do to yours, but for me, where I've looked through lots of different traditions and stories and tales and heard people's different beliefs, and some things, it's weird how even things from other regions that I've heard that I never realized would bleed into our culture comes out. Like, for instance, carrying around the cemetery dirt. That's something you hear in like vampire tales from like Transylvania, or werewolf tales, or silver. Silver is always like an element that pops up that can protect against evil, like in the story of like Sopdal. Lots of different traditions that just carry over and spill between region to region, and they have their origins, but yet each place makes it their own. I think that's what's fascinating about these tales, is that each place has made it its own, but it's grown into something more. Thank you for listening. Don't forget to check out our social media pages, Facebook and Instagram. If you want to contact us, that's the way to do it. We also there's a private group on Facebook as well. You can join us there. We're available on all your podcasting platforms. Link is in our bio. We have merch on the Printified website. There's also a link for that. Don't forget to rate and subscribe each episode. And if you're not following us, give us a follow. And make sure you hit the alert bell so you know when I drop new episodes. Once again, I'm Eric. I'm your ghost host. And this was the Hauntological Society.